Tracy Thompson is a local Petoskey entrepreneur who started his business, The Bowtie Baker, about 3 years ago. Ever since he started, business was never a problem. He became immediately successful and had constant waves of people requesting him for weddings and other formal events. We are really excited to share with you his story about how he created such a successful and well-rounded business.
I didn't know much about baking beforehand, so I had everything I had needed to start baking in my house. I had butter, I had flour, I had sugar, I had some eggs, and I had an oven.
Now I'd like to introduce you to Tracy Thompson. Tracy, tell me a little bit about yourself.
My name is Tracy Thompson, and the business that I own is called The Bowtie Baker. I make custom wedding desserts mainly. I specialize in macarons and cakes, but I dabble in all other kinds of desserts.
Tell me a little bit about your background. Where did you go to school? What's your major?
So I started my education at Petoskey. I graduated from Petoskey High School in 2003. Moved out to California and was a member of the Young Americans for a few years. I studied with Ballet Chicago, so I was definitely more into music and the arts. I wanted to be an educator and travel and perform. But then later on, I decided to change things up and I became an event coordinator. So I was a wedding planner for a couple different resorts in the area and then decided to start my business.
Where did the inspiration for your business come from?
So when I was planning weddings for Bay Harbor and for Staffords, I realized that the wedding market up here is really, really big, and there's a lot of money to be made in it. And there weren't a lot of dessert vendors. There's a lot of florists, there's a lot of photographers, but in terms of dessert vendors, there was like one or two. So they were really, really overworked. They were always really busy, and I'm such a foodie that I was like, hey, let's give this a try. So I went out on a whim and started some small weddings, and it kind of took off from there. I realized that people liked what I was making, and I was able to take a hobby into a business.
Why did you decide to pursue this idea?
So that's kind of the same thing where I realized that I wanted to be in the wedding market, but I just didn't think being the actual wedding planner was quite for me. I love weddings. I love making people happy on their happiest day, their most special day. But something about desserts, I got to be more creative. I could work a little bit with clients and not have so many email correspondences back and forth and meetings set up. And I got to just specialize on one area of the wedding instead of having to do all of them.
How did you find the money to initially fund it?
So that started out as a hobby, actually. So I realized that I didn't know much about baking beforehand. So I had everything I had needed to start baking in my house. I had butter, I had flour, I had sugar, I had some eggs, and I had an oven. And I kind of took my grandma's old recipes and started playing around with those and then started tweaking things to make them more updated. So then I would just take things to work and I would pass them around the kitchen and I would pass them around to some other people in my sales office and around the hotels and get their feedback. And that's kind of how all that came about.
How long did it take for the business to take off and be profitable?
Immediately, which I was very surprised by. Within the first 3 months of making desserts and passing them around just kind of as a hobby, I realized people started liking them and people asked me where they could purchase them, if I had a bakery. And then just kind of through word of mouth, I started picking up some actual bookings and was able to, just kind of go out on a whim and make desserts, travel, set them up, and it just kind of happened.
So how many weddings do you do per year?
So my first year, I did only about 4 weddings, and that was just, some of them were small. They only wanted, a small cake to cut. I'd never made a wedding cake before, so I was like, okay, well, let's just make a small cake and see what happens. Turned out well. You go through a lot of trial and error. I definitely had no experience decorating cakes before, so that can be super frustrating about making it perfect. You could look at a cake and find every imperfection on it, but from far away, it's like being an artist. They could look at a painting and change the colors of it, or add a tree here or add some flowers there. And that's how I look at my baking, is that it's never really going to be perfect, but it's perfect enough that it's good enough for somebody else. So just to go back to how many weddings I do, the first year I did 4, and then last year I had over a dozen, and then this year I have more than doubled that. I have more than 24 weddings this summer, and I'm still booking for this season.
How did you come up with the name of your business?
I absolutely love bow ties. Bow ties have been a thing. They were in my very first school picture, so my company is called the Bow Tie Baker. So it kind of put both of my hobbies and interests into one.
Tell me some obstacles of initially starting your business.
Initially starting the business is really frustrating and it's really scary, and baking is an exact science, where most cooking, if something doesn't taste good, you can just throw some more salt in or make it spicy with some hot sauce. Baking, if you add too much sugar, it can mess with your cooking times. If you add too much baking soda or baking powder for your leavening, your cake can rise too much and overflow on the pan. So a lot of it's trial and error. So the biggest obstacles for me were honing in on the recipes, not trying to tackle everything, and just focus on a few desserts at a time, perfect those, and then move on to something else.
What are the common qualities of entrepreneurs, and how did this make you successful?
Entrepreneurs have to be really driven. They have to be really dedicated, especially if you're self-employed, because you don't really know where your next paycheck is coming from. So for me, I have to be really aggressive on how I market myself, how I advertise myself, but not so much that I'm throwing my business in your face and trying to just plaster myself all around town and make a monopoly out of myself. So there's a lot of like ups and downs about being a good entrepreneur, but you definitely have to be organized. You have to be hardworking. You have to be able to manage your time. Say I have more than just one event a weekend. You have to figure out, well, okay, so my events are on Saturday, but I can't bake my things on Monday because they won't be fresh. And I can't, if I wait to do everything on Friday, then I run the risk of a cake not turning out, or a freezer getting unplugged, or a refrigerator getting unplugged. So as an entrepreneur, you have to be able to juggle a lot of things all at once. So if I were to be just a baker and bake, that'd be one thing. But I have to answer email inquiries, and I have to send out proposals. And so you have to be able to you have to multitask for sure. And if a batch of cookies is in the oven, you have to say, okay, I have 13 minutes. Can I draw up this proposal and send it out? So you have to be able to manage your time and just really be able to take every task and look at it as a big picture, but then also know how to break it down.
So how did you advertise?
My advertising started with a budget of $0. So I was like, okay, well, Instagram's free, Facebook is free, word of mouth is free. So right now I don't pay for any advertising. The only things that I've paid for is a web domain and then my business cards. And I would go around to florists and hand out my business cards. I'd go around to photographers, hand out my business cards, because those are your best referrals, are people actually in the industry that you work in. So I try to specialize most of my business for weddings. So that's why the photographers and the florists really can help you out. They can say, oh, I have this perfect, vendor that you should work with, the Bow Tie Baker. And likewise, I'll do the same thing. If there's a florist that I really, really like, I'll recommend them to somebody. So my advertising and marketing is definitely social media based and wedding vendor based.
Where are you now located?
So right now I bake out of my home, downtown Petoskey, but I have a business plan of a short term and a long term. My short term is to finish out this wedding season baking from my house, which definitely has its challenges. But in the next 2 years, my business plan is going to allow me to build a full-size commercially licensed kitchen in Charlevoix, so I can take on more business and I can branch out and start a shipping business.
Are you happy with where you're at? And if you could, what would you have done differently about the process of growing your business?
Yeah, I think as a business owner, you should always be happy with where you are, and be happy with the product that you're making, but know that it can never stay the same for too long. For me, the wedding industry changes. Some years people want full wedding cakes. The next year, you may not make a single wedding cake and you'll do a whole dessert bar. So for me, it's trying to not keep up with the trends, but it's being ahead of the trends and figuring out something new and something different. If I were to say I only make macarons, I would lose so much business because not everybody likes a macaron or even knows what a macaron is. And if I said, no, I don't make vegan or gluten-free cakes, then I'd lose out on a whole market of wedding couples that have dietary restrictions. So if I could, yes, I am very, very happy with where I am right now. I'm just waiting for the next step to happen so that I can grow my business, which is building the commercial kitchen. So if I could have started from day one with a commercial kitchen, that would have been, I would have been able to produce a lot more food, but my quality probably wouldn't have been as good because I would have taken on more business than I would have been able to handle.
Okay, well, thank you so much for meeting with us.
That's my pleasure. If you guys need any desserts, feel free to contact the Bowtie Baker. I'm on Instagram and Facebook.
We were really happy to have gotten the opportunity to talk to Tracy Thompson with the Bowtie Baker and learn more about how he became a successful entrepreneur. We realized that weddings in northern Michigan are in high demand. Caterers, florists, and wedding planners are constantly taking in income. Tracy capitalized on this opportunity and became a well-known dessert caterer in all of northern Michigan.